I'm starting it now.
Awesome. So today we're here to all discuss the different perspectives that people have for open source. You can see I put in like a quick meme just to seed and inspire the conversation. James Willingham is my CIO and co-founder. He's been quite involved in the open source community, and yeah, welcome all. Thank you. Look forward to chatting. James.
Thanks, Ninh. So I don't know, there's a few of you that were on the meeting the town hall meeting last week where we went over challenges facing the open source community inside and outside of Cardano, along with, you know, why they're facing these challenges. So today, our conversation is more geared to the perspectives, right? To dive a little bit further into where we were last week. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So why do people contribute to open source and why don't they? Right, so this is a very big topic. There's a lot of reasons why people contribute and why they don't. So we wanted to give this an opportunity for you guys, as well as us, to go over all of the different reasons why people contribute. So as an example, like I like to contribute just for the mere fact that I feel like I am participating in something bigger than myself. No, you're good. I'm waiting on the moment. So let me here.
Totally. And by the way, James, while you do this, I shared the Jamboard
Awesome.
with everyone in the chat. It's you guys can go in and edit, add your own sticky notes, right? Simple, just by clicking this.
Okay, so
right.
Yeah. Oh, now it's in there twice.
Right.
Awesome. So what are some reasons why, I mean, how many people here contribute to open source currently? Yes, Patrick.
Yeah, that was, I wanted to tell, I do.
Okay, so why?
Why? Well, why I do have because with my work, first of all, I can grow myself, and then I can help growing some idea of which I feel that I'm part of. That's the why.
Okay, so ability to grow your skills in things that you don't typically do at work, right? Maybe in a sense. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Also participation. And at work, you typically go on a project with a defined set of technology. You don't have space to grow in a transversal direction, to join topics. You follow the business topics.
Right.
Open source is about following your heart. I'm a bit too much romantic, but that's the idea.
Okay. Awesome. No, and that's a great reason to contribute. You know, so, you know, typically at a work environment, you have, you know, a certain tech stack that you're living in, but if you want to learn another tech stack, open source is a great way to do that, right? So that would be a great reason why. Anybody else here?
We have a team, and we're building an open source, a couple open source projects, right? And originally, I wasn't a believer in open source, to be very honest with everyone here. But one of our team members have changed my perception. A couple of reasons, right? When we were thinking of open source, we're thinking of, you know, well, we can't make money on it. obviously it's open source, so it's open, right? You can't monetize that. It's not proprietary. There's no IP protection. Could be a little tricky with security because it's open, right? Anyone can read your code and hack the system. However, when we joined, especially when we joined the Cardano community and got to learn about, hey, there's a whole challenge for open source development ecosystem, as well as a lot of people that contribute to open source projects and build, like open source is a public good, right? Build tools and platforms that the community can use. I changed my mind in many ways. I see open source now as a strength, as something that we can show a proud of our team, something to show transparently, involve the community in contributing, because it is like we're building something that contributes to the whole ecosystem. And anyone, like our ultimate goal is for anyone in this community, in the Cardano community, or even outside, right, can benefit from whatever we build, and hopefully build a community of developers, project managers, sales engineers, people managers all around it. So that's why. Very long-winded answer. I'll add my notes in.
Awesome. Thank you, Ninh. So another reason why, yes, you can add your notes to the board as well, Patrick. Yeah, so transparency is a big one. Let's see. Who wrote that one in? If you guys want to share, you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, sorry, I decided that you can delete it, or if it can be better phrased and fit into the framework better. But basically, if it's closed source, you really don't have any guarantee that it is actually what it says it is. So, for instance, a blockchain technology, which prides itself on immutable reference and security, reliable security, or deterministic reliable security, you don't even know if it were closed source, you don't even know that that's actually what it's doing. In addition to, or another way to say it is also a closed source solution or an open source solution. While it might have all of its stuff out there, you actually know what you're dealing with, because in a closed source solution, for instance, if your closed source cryptographic SAS, as I said, uses an encryption scheme that doesn't account for nuances in the way numbers are structured, that can make something otherwise trivially easy to break, you wouldn't even know it, right? Because there's no way to audit it. There's no way to find that out, actually. So that's what that means, I guess.
No, absolutely. No, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, and in that aspect, transparency is a big one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, audit security, stuff like that. No, it makes perfect sense. I agree. Okay. I see some other ones being added in there. So building standards and sharing documentation, another huge big one, right? So, documentation is one of the things that a lot of people take for granted, especially in open source. But if you have the right people in there that are actually doing the documentation and taking the time for that, it can actually help with one of the other ones, which is learning by doing with knowledgeable people, right? Another one, let's see, sharing efforts on complex community-owned software makes it cheaper and more robust, secure. Also true. So with all of these, so these are, very good reasons why people contribute. What are some reasons why people don't contribute? Yes, Patrick.
they fear that they are losing their core business.
Okay. That is a very, very big one, right?
Sorry,
well,
losing what?
Their core business, the thing that makes you winning on the market, things that makes you your money, your company money.
Yeah,
Oh,
the fear of
okay.
loss of monetization, right? So that is a huge one. So that's more of a, from a business aspect, okay? But you as a developer or a project manager or a designer or anything like that, what would be a reason why you wouldn't, as a developer, want to, why you wouldn't contribute to anything in open source?
Who's paying you?
Exactly. That's the big one, right? So the big one for the company is the fear of loss of monetization, right? You don't feel like you're going to be able to make money off of it. The other one for the developer, designer, or anything else is going to be your time, right?
It's going, dude.
Is that
NFT.
Gandhi Las Rios?
So, yeah, it's like, I gotta leave the room.
You have your,
There's bad noise and stuff.
I'm not sure
You see the drop on setup.
who has their, somebody can,
I muted. Thank you,
Okay.
Butterfly.
Thank you. Gandhi Las Rios, is that how you say it? Was that correct? You have your.
Gone. If you're speaking, we cannot hear you, by the way. I think your mic might not work. You have your hand up. You may have to disable your audio and rejoin again, or refresh your Zoom and rejoin. Yeah, let's. We'll get back to you, James. You wanna? We have a couple IP ownership.
Sorry guys, I was away for a few minutes. Did I miss something because someone tried to unmute me?
Oh, no, you're good.
All right.
Okay, so yes, another one would be definitely be IP ownership. Now it also goes into some of a few other things, like who actually owns the code, right? Then you have things like documentation. Once again, right? If there's nobody actually doing the documentation, it's very hard to get started, right? One of the big things for me that I struggle with from time to time with anything open source is the time to set up, right? If I, find an open source project that I really like and I really enjoy and I want to contribute to, I also have to look at how long does it take for me to get this process started on my machine, right? If it is something that's going to take a lot of time, then, obviously I don't have time to do that, right? Also very true. Yeah. Open source doesn't pay the bills. And that's not only as developers, that's also as anybody else that joins it, because the other piece of open source, that they don't really talk about is there should be project management. There should be designers. There should be a little bit more than just developers developing, right?
Yeah, I would even say as a developer, if you don't know the basics like Git even, right, it's hard to contribute. If you're not familiar with GitHub, you don't know how to start. A lot of the open source projects, if they're especially more complicated and more advanced, right, they don't have beginner level tasks. And as
Or
a
the-
developer, even I'm a senior developer, I look at an open source project, I have to review the code. And some projects, they have thousands and thousands of lines of code. So it just even takes time to start.
Well, and it's not just that, you know, one of the biggest things for me as well is, you know, when you look at an open source project, there's a lot of times where you have hundreds of people that have been contributing throughout the time of that open source project. So you have scattered code, right? Some being used, some not being used, some commented out, some not commented out, and still never used. So not really knowing where everything is, and having to take the time to go almost line by line of, you know, is this function actually ever being used throughout the system? Or just trying to understand one person's logic next to someone else's logic, and continuing down the line from there. So that one is a big one for me as well. And why I don't a lot of times, it really just depends on the open source project and how they're laid out. Any other reasons why anyone here doesn't decide to join any open source projects?
They're not developers, obvious.
I'm sorry, if anyone doesn't decide to.
Yeah, why would you, like, if you were a designer, developer, project manager, anything like that, why would you not want to join an open source project?
What's
Yes,
the
Patrick.
point?
Because the open source developers they have very little time and they can be very rude.
You say very rude?
Absolutely. like oh man, no, really. They can. So the point is, what I observed is that typically they have very little time. Initially, they are doing it as a side job, and then they transform this into a commercial activity, and then they have very limited time. This is like what I observed is, from one side is rude, on the other side, a project manager, old school project manager, 50% of the time, now a little bit less, 40% of the time tries to do micromanagement. And if you find an open source development, it's going to be, some good open source developer can be a real explosion. People fighting.
Yeah, no, and so not only that, but if, sorry, Ashton, I remember you said something as well. Was that correct? Did you say something?
Yeah, no, you can continue what you were just saying.
No, go
I'll
ahead.
say. Oh, okay. I was saying, well, at least it may be easy to see the benefits of open source if you're a developer, because you might probably already use a lot of open source software in whatever you do. But maybe if you're not a developer specifically, like you're a designer, what reason would you have to want to, what would you get, not what you're going to get out of it, but what's the point of contributing to open source if you're not a developer, if you can, for instance? Like, if I'm a designer, what's the point of contributing my designs to some open source collective or whatever? How does it help me or help other people even? You know, I don't know if that's. I guess understanding what the value of open source, not just software is, but the point of it in general can be.
I guess we, since it's not paid, you kind of go with the minimum of what you need, and oftentimes that is a bunch of developers coding away.
Right.
Yeah, there are a ton of benefits from someone who did not believe in OSS, right, to now dedicating whole teams to OSS projects. I can tell you that if you're, especially if you're newer to being a developer, right, or building your reputation as a developer publicly, right, that's one way to do it. Each one of us, all the engineers, if we are starting our projects, get hired at any company, all of us sign NDA, confidentialities, non-disclosures, and assignment agreement, right? Now, when you contribute to open source project, the code is open, it's public. People can see your contributions and all the work that you've done. And so you can just point, hey, check out my GitHub. That's it. That's the work I've done. And not just that you contributed to some private repository, but actual commits code. And in that way, if you are looking for a job, right, as a junior developer or even as a senior developer, and we want to take it a step further. Anyways, going back, or if you're trying to, establish your reputation, hey, I'm a Haskell Plutus hardcore guy. I can work on Plutus core open source projects, right? Some things that only 0.1% of developers can do, right? I know from working with recruiters at big and small companies that and hiring managers to look at your commits, especially when they're thinking of hiring you or hiring your company, your consulting firm, whatever.
Yeah, no, Ninh, great as well. So I also added another piece in there as well. Ashton, you asked the question of why a designer would, or even a project manager for that, for that fact. So this is a great way for designers to actually add to their portfolio. If you're a new designer, a new UX researcher, or anything like that, contributing to one of these is a great way for you to add to your portfolio to potentially get a job somewhere. Ninh, it looks like you were asked a question.
Ashton, I would say I was aware of how like recruiters and hiring managers work because I talked to like thousands of recruiters and hiring managers, software engineering managers and leaders, right? But I wasn't aware of the effect of how open sourcing something and building something truly open source and putting people on it can have on the team itself, right? It's super encouraging. Pretty much it's a statement of what you stand for. Like we want to build something and contribute to the community and have it be owned by the community, completely open, transparent, auditable, secure, right? And also it's a great way to engage with other developers, to test them, to hire them, eventually to show, hey, we have a real task, right? Can we code pair together on this? They can study and read through the source code. There's many benefits to this. Now, I would say when you guys are evaluating whether to open source or not, think about, is whatever you're building in this repo proprietary? Is it super secret, right? If no, then what's the point to close source it, right? Are you gonna make money on this? Or are there any other ways that you can make money on this, right? Or are there any more valuable revenue streams than whatever you're open sourcing? If no, then why close source it? Is security a extremely important aspect of this? Because security for open source, it has two, it's like a double-edged sword, right? When you open source it, your code is out there and hacker can just look at your code anyways. Hacker can look at your code anyway, right? Whether closed source or open, and find a way to get in. But what you can do with open sourcing is do bug bounties, right? Just like Cardano is doing with HackerOne, for example, and they award people for patching their security flaws. I could go on and on and on, right? There's definitely, when it comes to open sourcing, it's really like it's really like there's no middle. It's either all the way in or not, right? So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. So Ashton, does that answer all your questions?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So is there anything other than what we have listed on the board that you guys can think of why people do and do not contribute to open source? If not, we can move to the next discussion point. Yes, Patrick.
I was adding a note. Somebody wrote Cardano is open source, not exactly. Also, Hoskinson was saying that we are not truly open source.
Right.
We do have open source code, but to be open source, your code must be open source friendly. That means that you have to adhere to standards. So I was writing a note in yellow, writing we must adhere to open source standards. Yep, and I will put next to the, yeah, okay. So you keep your one. You keep your one. You keep it missing those. If I understand correctly, the green are the solutions, correct?
Yeah, red is against, reasons why not, just to help people organize. Yellow is like thoughts. Red is against. Red light, green light.
Awesome. Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick's right. Cardano is not currently open source, but there's a strategic commitment to open source from Charles, and it's in the strategic aims. So Cardano is committed to completely open sourcing its code base through a project called the DCF, which is going to be a long-term project. And as I put in comments, is obviously from the point of view of what development opportunities, that's obviously a development opportunity. So if developers can learn open source culture, a way of working and development, then there will be opportunities going down the roadmap in Cardano.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I love what DCF is doing and what Johnny's doing over there with the new Cardano open source initiatives, for sure. We actually had him on the last breakout room. I'll share the slides from the last breakout room there. You guys can check it out. We also recorded it, and the breakout room is posted in Swarm for those of you. I'll share links in chat for sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Ninh. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. All right. So with all of this that we just got done talking about, you know, we just went over why people do contribute, why they don't. So how do we get people to contribute regularly? Right? How are we going to, and this could be, like I said, this could be for anything open source related as well as Cardano, but how can we get people to want to contribute and get people to look at, you know, the open source Cardano community and go, I want to be here. And that is probably, Ninh, you really hit it right on the head with that one. So yes, pay them to contribute. You know, I'm guessing that was you, Patrick. So yeah, bounty for people who try to contribute. You know, provide feedback. You know, another, you know, sponsorships. Another one would be mentor-mentee models, right? Being able to, you know, have an opportunity for someone who is new to the open source environment, be able to sit with mentors that have been in the open source ecosystem for a while, right? Anything else that you guys can think of off the top of your head of how we could get people to contribute regularly? Yep, no, absolutely. Giving tokens of appreciation. It doesn't necessarily have to be monetarily.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially in like a more busy environment, right? And more less resource environment, saying thank you, even just minting a thank you NFT is a good thing. Even reviewing recommendations, right? Building reputation, helping each other.
Yeah, another approach is to, I mean, it's kind of related to the mentors-mentee model, but you can also translate to an educational model. So you can incentivize contributions by saying they're going to learn something by contributing. And then you frame that as a kind of training course, if you like, but they're actually producing work as they train.
Yep, no, absolutely. Now with that, obviously, if we're building out, like if open source ecosystem was trying to expand and get more people to contribute regularly, it's obviously going to be extremely hard to get that in place. Do you think it would have to be at a certain spot, or a certain amount of people already contributing before it could get to that spot? Or do you think that's something that they should start from the get-go in the very beginning?
I didn't quite get the question. Could you please rephrase?
So the idea of having, an educational model with within the open source project, right? Do you think that would be something that should be set up from the beginning? Or is that something that should be set up along the way, like after they've reached a certain milestone? Yep.
I see. So from my understanding, James, you're talking about, let's create potentially some kind of like a pathway from beginner to contributor to maybe, project manager, maintainer, admin, and so on, right?
Potentially, and that's why I was asking, right? Does that make the most sense, or is there something else that anyone else here can think of a way to? And Patrick, I know you had your hand up, but how we can get that process started? Like, is there a reason why it should be up front, or should it be in the middle, or should it be at the end, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think this process starts with proper documentation for sure, right? If you don't have, if an open source project doesn't have proper documentation, because on GitHub you can just commit anything, any code, and it's just code, right? Just text. If you don't tell people how to compile, how to start contributing README file that's not filled out, license even, right? I think Patrick can share a lot on this. Without proper documentation, it's hard to even get started.
From my experience, there are two things that are very important. How to contribute, or contributing.md, and then somebody that of the team that actively spends his time in creating bugs or bounties for newcomers, and in taking these newcomers and guiding them along the right way. Because if you think about the difference, the problem of self-education, that you never know the right path. But if there is somebody more expert than you, it can guide you through the minimum energy path. And this is what the people want. With a limited amount of time and a lot of motivation, what is the maximum utility I can give to this project that I support?
I mean, I see lots of not much knowledge of the project management features of GitHub and open source, that people don't utilize that enough. And also it's a way into open source without being too development orientated. You can use open source, you can approach open source not just from a developer's perspective, but from a automation and collaboration perspective, which people don't appreciate enough. And that's probably where a lot of education work needs to be done, because if people did appreciate that more, it make it more accessible, is my view. Anyway.
No, that's absolutely great, Stephen, and I agree with you. Let's see. So with that, so if we have proper documentation, so what we're setting up here is if we have proper documentation, if we actually utilize a lot of the stuff that in GitHub that isn't currently being utilized or looked over or anything like that, the thought is it'll drive more collaboration, more people would be wanting to contribute, and you'll have more adoption of that project. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I use GitHub a lot for, primarily for documentation and project management rather than development. The only development I do is slight automation using, GitHub Actions, that kind of stuff. But most of what I do is for issue management and relating that to governance. So, and the barriers I get is that from non-developers, getting non-developers to use open source tools in that way. And that's coming from a top-down perspective, if you like. And people are starting to use it in that way, particularly the beta features, the new beta features of GitHub, particularly. And then what I noticed coming up from the other direction is that a lot of developers aren't aware of these features as well. So a lot of developers they might be, aware of all the version control tools and all the forking, all the kind of classic tools, but they're not so aware of workflow tools or automation tools either. So there's a job to be done to develop libraries and automation libraries and ways to manage work, to tie things together.
Awesome. No, absolutely. Go ahead, Ninh.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, one of the points that we discussed last breakout room was it's just developers right now, mostly on OSS, right? And most of them, they didn't sign up to be maintainers and do the people work and the admin work of, managing people, right? But they have to, because you're working with people. Open source is a community project. And like Patrick said, hey, you need designers, you need project managers. Like you said, we need non-developers to contribute to really make it a sustainable ecosystem, right? Especially if we're building something that is here to stay. Now, Johnny from RG, head of open source there, he mentioned, hey, sales engineers are people's people. They're developer advocates, right? They are doing a lot of the hustle and bustle and work on a lot of open source tools, right? That connect a lot of integrations, interoperability. So that might be, immediate, like a target of people that understand the tools that we have, and targeting one persona at a time. I'm not going to say that, hey, marketing people will start to contribute to open source today, right? if they don't know Git, you have to teach them GitHub, right? How to comment, how to do commits, and so on.
I mean, another approach is the kind of dog fooding approach. It's like, okay, what problems can you solve? What problems do you have that you can solve with open source tools? You know, like, I look at it that way, like, the reports that you put in for funding, the stuff that we do in Catalyst. If you can use open source tools in our community, look to your community and see what you can solve with open source tools. And that, like, there's a kind of a dog fooding stuff going on there where people will get to learn the tools to help them, that kind of thing, that kind of a virtuous feedback, hopefully.
Awesome. No, both great points. Patrick?
Each project has its own process. And the process is the way that you set up the environment, you add a bug, you contribute, you test, and you deploy, and you document. And that you need to remember everything. The process can be flawless for some people, but with a simplistic approach, maybe you remember, you forget how to set up. You just did the setup once, and you just use it. And I believe that things have to be documented, especially the points that are critical. Every project needs to spend effort at the beginning to understand what is critical. In our open source project, one of the criticalities is how to communicate applications with a wallet. And our approach at the start of the project is to have discussion and put down documentation, have work groups with on the same topic, unless we solve this issue. When this is done, we create documentation. What I really want to say, the process is flawless, is straight for the people that are inside.
Right.
But is obscure from the externals. And an open source project always wants to get external inside to understand, to become users, and then maybe in the future to become contributors. Understanding is the single most important thing. And there are really a lot of basic blockers. One basic blocker that I still have, come on, I'm doing this job since 15 years. But if you tell me to fork your repository on GitHub, do my change on my repository, push it and get your feedback, it's still a process that is not flawless for me because I'm most used to a different workflow. Again, each project has its own process. So your process should be extremely clear and detail if there is something difficult.
Awesome. No, and you brought up a great point, Patrick. So, transparency, right? Obviously, that is a big, huge one. Because like you said, you have your internal, right, team, and you guys are working on things, you guys are adding to it, so on and so forth. But the people on the outside have no clue what that is, right? But they should know, right? How can they contribute to this project if they're not able to see what's happening on the inside as well? Ellen, is it Ellen?
Hi. Yes, so thank you for open this discussion today. I'm very familiar with the movements of open source. I've been in Brazil involved in some points, but now I'd like to ask you, what about the security? Because, for example, there is a NFT platform that some Brazilians were involved, constructed with Tezos. Hictenunk, and they made it an open source. But once you open the code, people can kind of learn its fragilities, weakness, and then try to use these in a different way. So this, when we are talking about crypto, is what is kind of intriguing me. How can we manage open source and platforms if we need extreme security?
Gotcha. So there are a few different ways that you can actually handle that. So number one, Ninh said this earlier, when it comes to security, whether it's open source or not, they're going to figure out a way, right? If there is a way, it's going to get found, right? So one of the things that you could potentially do is you can hide certain pieces of the code base that are represented for the security pieces. You could do something like that. Just use a simple git ignore. You can have bug bounties for patches and security flaws, which Ninh just put in there. And then, so there's all kinds of different things that you can potentially do to beef up the security on the open source framework. Because not only that, but you could also, if it's open source, if there's somebody that's wanting to learn security, become, to work in as a, I can't think of the name of it, but they're learning to become a white hat hacker or anything like that. They could use, you can open it up for them and they can use this as a starting platform, right? So there's options like that as well. Does that answer your question?
Oh yes, it's something that I would like to hear more from you, because for me, coming from the arts, open source is wonderful. It's like it's intelligence collective. We share things, we share information, and people still need to have information to understand what is being shared and everything. Yep. But I think I want to hear more about open source and security. But thank you for your answer.
Ellen, absolutely. That's one of my concerns before we decided to open source a lot of our projects, right? And build open source projects. Because obviously there's the code, and if it's public, anyone can just go, not just expert hackers that they have to actually, get access to your code base. And if you're an expert hacker, whether it's open source or closed source, it doesn't matter. If they want to hack you, you will be hacked, right? No matter if you're, Google or Facebook or the NSA or whatever. That's one point. Security is always a proactive effort that requires resources and people and constant upkeep, right? Because there's new exploits being built every day. Now, with the open source, however, just because it's open source, I know and I can expect my developers not to put blatant mistakes, such as put the unhashed password or API key or tokens that shouldn't be public, right, in the code. You would be surprised, my wife is an engineering leader, right? At one of our companies, I'm not gonna tell you which one, they just put all the admin root keys in a code itself, right? And that is like a well-funded company too, like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And that is very quickly catchable in open source, right? I believe in good, in people, that almost everybody is good. There are some bad actors for sure, right? That's why you have white hat hackers and black hat hackers. But by opening something, you're inviting the community to give you feedback, right? 99.9% of it's going to be positive. hey, here's a flaw, you have the password there, change it, so that you know. If you don't know, then whether it's open source or not, you still have the vulnerability, right? I hope that answers your question or some questions.
I'm not, I think, I mean, I'm not sure if I agree with the statement, whether it's open or close, hacker is gonna hack it anyway. I think, I mean, like, if it's closed software, then you have to, like, what's it called again? You have to reconstruct the code, right? You can't just take the code and then put it back into C# with a program or something.
Well, Simon, I was talking from a standpoint of doing a lot of legal compliances, SOC 2 Type 2, ISO compliances. One of the tenets there for security that they have is security and vulnerabilities and data leaks, especially with GDPR, data privacy. It's not a matter if you get hacked. It's just a matter of, you know, it's not a matter of whether you get hacked. It's just a matter of, you know, when you get hacked, right? Sooner or later.
Yeah,
hopefully it doesn't happen ever.
Absolutely. I think, and I absolutely agree with you on the other thing, which is that the open source, that is the absolute superpower, actually, I think, is that everyone can look into it and can help you discover what are the vulnerabilities.
Right. And like with everything, right? We're all human. We all can do things well and we can not do things well, right? You can do open source well, securely, and you can also not care.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep, no, absolutely. Thanks, guys. So any other reasons or things that we could think about of ways to get people to contribute regularly? All right. If there's nothing else, I think we should go ahead and go to the next slide. So the next one is, what does a solution look like? Okay, so we went over, you know, why people contribute and why they don't, right? We went over how do we get people to contribute regularly. So now, what does a solution look like that answers all of these problems? Does anybody have any ideas? Thanks, Seaman. No ideas?
Make a MVP that is not for profit at all. Like something, one of the things that occurred to me a while ago is it would be cool to have blockchain, which is so mired by all the FUD and formal of cryptocurrency, to have applications that demonstrate its value, but that have nothing to do with money. Instead, they, you know, or have other use value that makes it, you know, for instance, like I imagine Arxiv, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the scientific publication repository. I don't know, I think they're a nonprofit, but something like that would be, and I know some people have proposed things where you could just have an open source based repository for scientific publications. You know, that way it doesn't have to be caught up in being about how much value it produces, or more importantly, the value it produces is not the measurable, tangible kind as this money, but it's like more of the intangible kind that kind of points to the deeper value it can represent.
Awesome. No, great. So yeah, making an MVP that's not profit. You know, that is, you know, obviously, you know, a very good way to get people interested. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, making an MVP that's not for profit, does that provide the complete solution? I think it's a very good start. But I think if we add some different things to it, so, if we build something that people love, or we start to build something, excuse me, then at that point, how do we even get it out there so people can see that they can contribute to it, from all angles, right? So if you are building something that is absolutely amazing and it's not for profit, how are we going to let people know that they are able to contribute to it, whether they are a project manager, whether they are a designer or an ethical hacker or a developer, or really anything at that point, right? So yeah, so a great thing was just posted. It's easy to do like a forum, stuff like that. So it's also thinking about those things, right? How do we get those things in there to drive more people to it, right? Because obviously, if you have that amazing MVP, how do you get more people to it? What would be a good solution to bring people in from more than just developers? That would definitely be interesting. Create full-time OSS jobs.
Yeah, I'm almost questioning like how big the open source project has to be, right?
Yeah.
Or how rich one person needs to be to not have to worry about bills, right? Or how passionate one has to be in whatever they're contributing to. What is the vision and mission behind the open source project, right?
I have an answer for your 3 points. What I believe, big for people, it's enough, because you can share, you have enough liveliness that you can start working on other tasks if you are blocked on one, and you have enough variation, different minds, that you can approach a solution from another point of view. 3 is a little bit, you can have strange dynamics. 4, it's a very good starting point. 5 would be nice. More or less like Scrum, agile. And reach, well, think about it. How it happens that the people get involved with it. They become users or interested. And then they see the opportunity to get into. Well, if you want to incentivize them, you need to give something. Let's make an example. If you are, if I know that by working 5 hours per week, at the end of the month, I'm going to earn $500, can change my life if I'm in Africa. And it can also make a difference if I'm in the US, $500, not nothing, but it's a little bit less. The important is that you can get this quid more. And it's not a lot, but it has to be something that you can feel it. That's how much rich you want to become. That's for the beginning. And then what's next, you learn with time. We know how it works. A developer in the US or in a rich nation, say Singapore, or I don't know, take Switzerland, is easily able to make it 100K a year. And a developer in, I don't know, like in an average developing nation, or in an average developed company, like an average company in the US, it's probably making 50K. Or I'm thinking about, I don't know, France, maybe Germany. I don't know how it works, but I believe also India more or less is on like not exactly 50K, maybe a little bit less. I think it's 1.5K a month, roughly. But yeah, let's say that there is this middle tier, 50K a year would be a great achievement. Another tier, 25K a year. So there are different levels. But when you become professional, you tend to enter a structure that is more organized and depends on your locality. And if the work is remote, when you excel, when you go above a certain level, you can ask more or less those between 50 to 100K working from everywhere in the world. At least 50 you can. And it can totally change your life if you are in Africa. It can be a subpar salary if you live, I don't know, in Singapore. I don't know exactly how it works in Singapore. So reach, it should be enough that at the next level that you achieve, you feel the change, and passionate as much as possible. Otherwise, you will be blocked at the next by the next blocker. Let me be honest. I'm developing with other people a project which I believe it's complex, and there are a lot of blockers. But as a team, we have a lot of passion, and we don't care about blockers. If there is really a wall in front of us, we try another road. That's passion.
Patrick, you bring up several really amazing points that I personally haven't actually thought about the impact, right? We're pretty committed to help build and sustain the open source ecosystem by many proposals, you know. But you mentioned like full-time jobs, specifically for open source, are actually within reach and also possible, right? For people who don't have a high cost of living. In US, you know, if you're a CS graduate, it's pretty easy for you to get a 100K job. Quite true, right? But even what if you didn't graduate with computer science degree, right? What if you're a self-taught engineer? What if you just go to Udemy, Coursera and learn? And this is irrespective of border, right? Open source gives you, working on open source gives you ability to showcase your skills and earn real work experience, right? I call this build your proof of reputation and proof of merit, so that, you know, at some point someone can either sponsor the project, or we have bounties, or even sponsor you as a developer to keep contributing to their passion project, stuff that people care about. There are many open source projects, right? Not just talking about ours, many others, like what you guys are doing as well, right? To boost the Cardano community. That I personally believe, if there's an organization that match whatever you donate, maybe if you donate like $1, $2 towards upkeep or further development of this of a OSS project, then they would match it with you, right? Then there's going to be a lot of appetite for that, especially if we can say, hey, this created, you know, 20 or 30 opportunities for people across the world, right? Or 100 or 200 or however many. That scales with the level of funding. And in this way, we truly create one world, one market of jobs and opportunities, right? That proactively build an open ecosystem, right? open and public goods that any developer can use. It's pretty genius.
And there is another point that is important, and it's the how. And the how also as a response, but in form of a few stories. One of these is me, and another two are people that I know. So there is a guy that is a genius, very young, gets engaged in the open source in his free time, and since he's fast, he travels around the world to make presentations. And at a certain point, he's hired in a company, which is a further step from his original place, where he can showcase even better, and he has more free time. Get a better job, more time for himself, and he capitalized the more time that he has for himself in doing more open source, and he gets to have a job in a company that does truly open source. Another guy is a normal developer that does, the day job, and then in the evening, couple of hours of contribution to open source. Well, maybe he's not a genius, but in a year or so, get to know an open source project and move forward. And another example is somebody that is technically very good, and in a company is able to build a very good product for this company. But then he feels limited by the company and kind of wants to look around. And at this point, leaves the company and jumps out of the company because he's very confident of his skill, find a group, and with this group, they create an open source project disconnected from the first. And through this open source project, all the people of this group, they find job in open source based companies. Open source, so these are three stories, three possibilities, these three things that I saw. It can be that you are super smart. It can be that you are a normal person. It can be that you decide to do the jump. But it's all about you do a little bit more. You do your day job. You don't feel it's enough for you. You want to do more, like all of us here. And we are doing more. Now we are trying to understand. We want to do more. And then that bit that you do more, you want really to be effective. You want to put your skills in a place that are well directed. You want to find people that are directing you. In my case, I was helped by people in the open source project because another people told me that's an interesting project. Why don't you do this? And my problem at the time was using that particular system for performing the commits. That was Bugzilla. No, sorry, whatever. Don't even remember now. But basically, it was really, I was really motivated. I knew about the technology. I knew the base language. Java was easy, simple for me, but I didn't know enough to overcome the first blocker. And when you have the first blockers, I mean, you really have to have like a page, an entry page in which you list in order the possible blockers at different levels. Say you are interested, like you have a page for people that are interested in understanding what is the project. Then here is the architect, the people that has the vision that should write what is it from the first concept to the end. Then it should be targeted. Then you have a second tab in your website in which you put the open source project on the perspective of somebody that wants to build it on his own. And there you give you have to give the examples on how to build, how to make it work. And then you need to give a fair perspective to the people that really want to contribute back. And then there you have to give, make big, you create another tab, how to perform the commit. Nowadays, if you take a standard GitHub project, They don't even tell you that how you should fork and perform a commit. They assume that you know how to do this. This can be a blocker.
Yep.
And there are other things, but you need to consider everything, and you are doing a great job by opening this discussion, I believe.
Yeah, and Patrick, you brought up a lot of really, really great points. So absolutely 100% thank you for that. You know, I do agree with you, like having some kind of structure, right? Whether it be a website, whether it be a documentation, whether it be, you know, README files, whatever the case may be, to lay everything out in an easy to digest manner, right? So number one, that is going to help with newcomers, right? And one of the problems that you have with open source, it's very intimidating to newcomers, right? So the least you make it, or the less you make it intimidating, the more people you could have contributing, right? And so I definitely agree with you there. Does anybody else have anything they want to say with that as well? Absolutely, Patrick. So all right, so let's continue that conversation since nobody had anything else. So
Oh, I have one other thing that might be helpful. A solution this is very early, but a solution might be able to be based around accessibility, because there's not much accessibility as far as, you know, hardware itself goes, but software is something everyone can kind of contribute in, and especially with tokenization, it might be a basis to, especially open source, to make, you know, tokenization actually pay off for people. Because, give an example, is all the images on Twitter that people post and share, or TikTok, or, you know, Imager, most of them don't have all descriptions for people who have a disability related to vision. But there's no reason that people use those things, and at the same time, I guess you just have to be a little careful that you balance how much you can do with AI, right? At the end of the day, because you can do all that maybe really easily with AI, but then that kind of defeats the point of all the other benefits that come with collaborative work and so forth. So that's all.
awesome. And now that was that Ashton? Sorry, I was unable to see who was talking. No, I agree. Sorry, my internet's kind of flaking at the moment.
Hey, Ashton, and I was gonna add to that accessibility not only for physical impairment but also for neurodiversity, right? Not everyone's brain works the same, but we can all contribute. And on that point is to remember that fellow contributors, people who are working on the open source projects, are fellow humans. I know Patrick brought up, you know, because of lack of resources and time, right? The OSS development process can become toxic at times. People are rude. So I almost wonder, you know, how can we incentivize like a team building and positive community building behavior from people who are involved, right? For example, NFTs, thank you NFTs, peer reviews, code of conduct. You know, maybe I know dev.to is building like a developer community where people are pretty much building their Facebook profiles, right? kudos, commits, comments. Yeah, community, building really open source community that could be hackathons, that could be in-person or remote events, right? To bring people together, get to know each other, so that you're not just a username that's committing code, but you're a real person with real feelings. Yep.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Ninh. So Patrick, do you want to go over your question that you had?
So I would incentivize everyone who improves the understanding for whoever improves the understanding for everyone. Let's make a thought experiment. Let's say that we can have an anonymous voting on 2 questions. The first is who of the participants can build a blockchain, a Cardano blockchain application that interacts with your own browser? Who want to do this? Who want to build this? And the second question is, say, who of the participants feels that he will be able to do this in, let's say, 2 weeks? Now, if these 2 numbers are very different, let's say that 90% want to do this and 10% can do this, this is where we must act by putting documentation in form of MVP, minimum viable prototype. And we need the, remember, open source is mostly about this. Like the very, I don't know if you know Java, but maybe NPM. With NPM in a command line, a couple of selections, you can generate a full application. There are a lot of tools for generating these MVPs. I think that the community now should focus on documenting basic architectures, and say that I'm pretty sure that is not a big effort, but we can really document the basic patterns of working on a blockchain. Then you go document this. You give the weapons to an army of developers that are already burdened by, the fact that the concepts of the blockchain are not easy. The languages used, the set of languages used in the blockchain are not easy. But then you make their life way easier if you give them a bunch of how to do this architecture in a way that we believe is good. At the beginning is just in a way that is possible. But really, this is what I would incentivize. If I were IOG, I would really throw my money in like making sure that the man on the road, when interviewed, can tell you how to build a Cardano blockchain application. Because this is how we had the explosion of the mobile apps, that everybody was able to create, let's talk about Android or iOS application. The big companies provided a toolkit that basically the toolkit was just about some generator to create basic application that people had to think about. Somebody came up with some more powerful framework, scaffolding, exactly. That is what we are missing. I actually have a proposal about this, but the idea is, my proposal is about a tool that generates stuff, but I mean, I must not be the only one. Everybody of you that has a good idea, please put your idea together, go to next fund, make a proposal in this direction, get the fund, help everybody to do their stuff. Because there must not be only a good idea, unless this idea is the perfect one, and there are no such perfect ideas.
No
That's my point.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Ninh.
Like you said, Patrick, perfect things are usually in dreams.
No, so Patrick, I agree with you. I think if we can, the toolkit idea, and stuff like that, that is absolutely necessary. That's how you drive adoption. The more toolkits you have, the easier it is for people to develop, the more adoption you get, and the further you can move. So that is always the case, and it always will be. So I definitely agree with you there. And, having those toolkits will also help in a lot of ways with some of these, open source projects, and could even potentially use some of these open source projects to create those toolkits, right? Now, if that's the case, how do, I could see us driving quite a bit of people from the open source community into helping build these toolkits, speaking specifically to the Cardano stuff. And by doing that, we could easily drive adoption a lot faster. Were you gonna say something?
Adoption is the key word.
Yeah.
This came up in a different context, but similar related. But I was talking to a Java developer who did some work on some other chains, and one of the things he pointed out was that Java is, for instance, still the most widely used programming language. So I don't know how easy it would be to make Cardano work with a Java environment, but it might be a way to approach adoption as a way to kind of make a first pass at those kind of techies, I want to say, more than anything else, just to get that kind of that cross section of people also interested, because I imagine there's got to be some utility in using Java to do a lot of the things that might be a little bit more difficult completely in the browser. I don't know, just to put it out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When it comes to adoption, it all comes down to a few different things, right? So one is ease of use. Two is going to be what language is it in, right? The more developers you have out there that are in that language, obviously the more people that you're going to have to be able to adopt and use. So that's definitely stuff to keep in mind. Now, I know, like, if I was doing an open source project and I was doing something along the lines of wanting to create a toolkit, we'll use that as an example, right? I would want to create an open source project that way, in a sense, to where you could have, if it's Java related, if it's JavaScript related, if it's Flutter related, whatever the case may be, everybody would have access and the ability to contribute no matter what language they're strongest in. So I think that's another thing that, looking at open source projects, as developers, most of us know that there's 1,000,001 ways to solve a problem, and it doesn't always have to be in a certain language to be able to solve that problem. So one thing that we could do is in open source projects is, is there a way to incorporate other languages? Should there be a repo for each language, and have different ones being built at the same time? Also something to think about.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. I think we're about at 95 minutes right now, or 90 minutes, because we joined a bit late, me and James, because of the co-host issue. But I invite you all to fill out the form here. I'll put it in the chat as well, just to share contact information with each other, right? If you wanted to connect and collaborate with everyone here, I know that includes people who joined the previous open source breakout rooms, and we'll also include future breakout rooms, right? I think this is a list of people who stand for, hey, let's collaborate, let's build an open source Cardano together, in and out of Cardano, whatever open source projects you guys have, because it's very clear to me that open source can be done well, right? It can also be done terribly wrong, whether you're a business or an individual contributor, right? As a business, I want to make sure that when I decide to open source or build a open source MVP or open a project, that I am doing it for the right reasons, right? And that my concerns are addressed correctly, and that the documentation is there, and I'm setting myself for success. Every project wants to do that. And as a developer, right, especially a new one, or even an expert contributor, right? How can I use open source to benefit and change my life? What is the pathways for success on open source? And going beyond that, how can I help open source to benefit others, right, around me? How can I use this amazing vehicle to change other people's lives and do good in the world, right? Because I strongly believe that we're not just doing things for ourselves, right, but also for people that we love, and hopefully as well as the generations after us. So thank you all. Amazing discussion. If you guys want to join in and fill out the form, there's Johnny, Patrick, me, all my co-founders on it. The form will be shared with anyone. This will be shared as well with Felix and the amazing people at Cardano's form, right, to post. I'll ping it in Telegram and Discord and whatnot. But look out for one of these again, probably in 2 to 3 weeks, maybe if Patrick wants to run one, right? Special shout out to James. Thank you for moderating today, James, and to everyone who joined. Thank you, guys.
Thank you a lot for the effort. It's amazing, honestly.
Thank you.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.